Chapter 18. Spring Days. The ice in the harbor grew black and rotten in the March suns. In April there were blue waters and a windy white-capped gulf, and again the four winds' light began the twilights. "I'm so glad to see it once more," said Anne on the first evening of its reappearance. "I've missed it so all winter. The northwestern sky has seemed blank and lonely without it." The land was tender with brand new golden-green baby leaves. There was an emerald mist on the woods beyond the glen. The seaward valleys were full of fairy mists at dawn. Vibrant winds came and went with salt foam in their breath. The sea laughed and flashed and preened and allured like a beautiful coquettish woman. The herring school and fishing village woke to life. The harbor was alive with white sails making for the channel. The ships began to sail outward and inward again. "On a spring day like this," said Anne, "I know exactly what my soul will feel like on the resurrection morning." "There are times in spring when I sort of feel that I might have been a poet if I had been caught young," remarked Captain Jim. "I catch myself conning over old lines and verses I heard the schoolmaster reciting 60 years ago. They don't trouble me at other times. Now I feel as if I had to get out on the rocks or the fields or the water and spout them." Captain Jim had come up that afternoon to bring Anne a load of shells for the garden and a little bunch of sweet grass which he had found in a ramble over the sand dunes. "It's getting real scarce along the shore now," he said. "When I was a boy there was a plenty of it. But now it's only once in a while you'll find a plot, and never when you're looking for it. You just have to stumble on it. You're walking along the sand hills, never thinking of sweet grass, and all at once the air is full of sweetness, and there's the grass under your feet. I favor the smell of sweet grass. It always makes me think of my mother." "She was fond of it?" asked Anne. "Not that I knows on. Dunno she's ever saw any sweet grass. No, it's because it was kind of motherly perfume. Not too young, you understand. Something kind of seasoned and wholesome and dependable, just like a mother. The schoolmaster's bride always kept it among her handkerchiefs. You might put that little bunch among yours, Mistress Blythe. I don't like these boughten scents, but a whiff of sweet grass belongs anywhere a lady does." Anne had not been especially enthusiastic over the idea of surrounding her flower beds with quaog shells as a decoration. They did not appeal to her on first thought. But she would not have hurt Captain Jim's feelings for anything, so she assumed a virtue she did not at first feel and thanked him heartily. And when Captain Jim had proudly encircled every bed with a rim of the big milk-white shells, Anne found to her surprise that she liked the effect. On a town lawn, or even up at the glen, they would not have been in keeping, but here in the old-fashioned, sea-bound garden of the little house of dreams, they belonged. "They do look nice," she said sincerely. "The schoolmaster's bride always had cowhawks around her beds," said Captain Jim. "She was a master hand with flowers. She looked at 'em and touched 'em so, and they grew like mad. Some folks have the knack. I reckon you have it too, Mistress Blythe." "Oh, I don't know, but I love my garden and I love working in it. To potter with green growing things, watching each day to see the dear new sprouts come up is like taking a hand in creation, I think. Just now my garden is like faith, the substance of things hoped for, but bide a wee." "It always amazes me to look at the little wrinkled brown seeds and think of the rainbows in 'em," said Captain Jim. "When I ponder on them seeds, I don't find it nowise hard to believe that we've got souls that live in other worlds. You couldn't hardly believe there was life in them tiny things, some no bigger than grains of dust, let alone color and scent, if you hadn't seen the miracle, could you?" Anne, who was counting her days like silver beads on a rosary, could not now take the long walk to the lighthouse or up the Glen Road, but Miss Cornelia and Captain Jim came very often to the little house. Miss Cornelia was a joy of Anne's and Gilbert's existence. They laughed side-splittingly over her speeches after every visit. When Captain Jim and she happened to visit the little house at the same time, there was much sport for the listening. They waged wordy warfare, she attacking, he defending. Anne once reproached the captain for his baiting of Miss Cornelia. "Oh, I do love to set her going, Mistress Blythe," chuckled the unrepentant sinner. "It's the greatest amusement I have in life. That tongue of hers would blister a stone, and you might have that young dog of a doctor enjoy listening to her as much as I do." Captain Jim came along another evening to bring Anne some mayflowers. The garden was full of the moist, scented air of a maritime spring evening. There was a milk-white mist on the edge of the sea, with a young moon kissing it, and a silver gladness of stars over the glen. The bell of the church across the harbor was ringing dreamily sweet. The mellow chime drifted through dusk to mingle with the soft spring moan of the sea. Captain Jim's mayflowers added the last completing touch to the charm of the night. "I haven't seen any this spring, and I've missed them," said Anne, burying her face in them. They ain't to be found around Four Winds, only in the barrens away behind the glen up yonder. I took a little trip today to the land of nothing to do and hunted these up for you. I reckon they're the last you'll see this spring, for they're nearly done." "How kind and thoughtful you are, Captain Jim." "Nobody else, not even Gilbert," with a shake of her head at him. "Remember that I always long for Mayflowers in spring." "Well, I had another errand, too. I wanted to take Mr. Howard back yonder a mess of trout. He likes one occasional, and it's all I can do for a kindness he did me once. I stayed all afternoon and talked to him. He likes to talk to me, though he's a highly educated man, and I'm only an ignorant old sailor. Because he's one of the folks that's got to talk or they're miserable, and he finds listeners scarce around here. The Glen folks fight shy of him because they think he's an infidel. He ain't that far gone exactly. Few men is, I reckon, but he's what you might call a heretic. Heretics are wicked, but they're mighty interesting. It's just that they've got sort of lost looking for God, being under the impression that he's hard to find, which he ain't never. Most of 'em blunder to him after a while, I guess. I don't think listening to Mr. Howard's argument is likely to do me much harm. Mind you, I believe what I was brought up to believe. It saves a vast of bother. And back of it all, God is good. The trouble with Mr. Howard is that he's a little too clever. He thinks that he's bound to live up to his cleverness and that it's smarter to thrash out some new way of getting to heaven than go by the old track the common ignorant folks is traveling. But he'll get there sometime all right, and then he'll laugh at himself. "Mr. Howard was a Methodist to begin with," said Miss Cornelia, as if she thought he had not far to go from that to heresy. "Do you know, Cornelia," said Captain Jim gravely, "I've often thought that if I wasn't a Presbyterian, I'd be a Methodist." "Oh, well," conceded Miss Cornelia, "if you weren't a Presbyterian, it wouldn't matter much what you were. Speaking of heresy, reminds me, Doctor, I've brought back that book you lent me, that Natural Law in the Spiritual World. I didn't read more than a third of it. I can read sense and I can read nonsense, but that book is neither the one nor the other. It is considered rather heretical. Ladies and gents, it is considered rather heretical in some quarters," admitted Gilbert. "But I told you that before you took it, Miss Cornelia." "Oh, I wouldn't have minded its being heretical. I can stand wickedness, but I can't stand foolishness," said Miss Cornelia calmly, and with the air of having said the last thing there was to say about natural law. "Speaking of books, a Mad Love come to an end at last 2 weeks ago," remarked Captain Jim musingly. "It run 103 chapters. When they got married, the book stopped right off, so I reckon their troubles were all over. It's real nice that that's the way in books anyhow, isn't it? Even if it isn't so anywhere else." "I never read novels," said Miss Cornelia. "Did you hear how Geordie Russell was today, Captain Jim?" "Yes, I called in on my way home to see him. He's getting round all right, but stewing in a broth of trouble as usual, poor man. Of course he brews up most of it for himself, but I reckon that don't make it any easier to bear." "He's an awful pessimist," said Miss Cornelia. "Well, no, he ain't a pessimist exactly, Cornelia. He only just never finds anything that suits him." "And isn't that a pessimist?" No, a pessimist is one who never expects to find anything to suit him. Geordie ain't got that far yet. You'd find something good to say of the devil himself, Jim Boyd." "Well, you've heard the story of the old lady who said he was persevering. But no, Cornelia, I have nothing good to say of the devil." "Do you believe in him at all?" asked Miss Cornelia seriously. "How can you ask that when you know what a good Presbyterian I am, Cornelia? How could a Presbyterian get along without a devil?" "Do you?" persisted Miss Cornelia. Captain Jim suddenly became grave. "I believe in what I heard a minister once call a mighty and malignant and intelligent power of evil working in the universe," he said solemnly. "I do that, Cornelia. You can call it the devil, or the principle of evil, or the old scratch, or any name you like. It's there, and all the infidels and heretics in the world can't argue it away any more than they can argue God away. It's there, and it's working. But mind you, Cornelia, I believe it's going to get the worst of it in the long run." "I am sure I hope so," said Miss Cornelia, none too hopefully. "But speaking of the devil, I am positive that Billy Booth is possessed by him now. Have you heard of Billy's latest performance?" "No, what was that?" "He's gone and burned up his wife's new brown broadcloth suit that she paid $25 for in Charlottetown because he declares the men looked too admiring at her when she wore it to church the first time. Wasn't that like a man?" "Mistress Booth is mighty pretty, and brown's her color," said Captain Jim reflectively. "Is that any good reason why he should poke her new suit in the kitchen stove? Billy Booth is a jealous fool, and he makes his wife's life miserable. She's cried all week about her suit. Oh, Anne, I wish I could write like you. Believe me, wouldn't I score some of the men around here?" Those Booths are all a mite queer, said Captain Jim. Billy seemed the sanest of all the lot till he got married, and then his queer jealous streak cropped out in him. His brother Daniel, now, was always odd. Took tantrums every few days or so and wouldn't get out of bed, said Miss Cornelia with a relish. His wife would have to do all the barn work till he got over his spell. When he died, people wrote her letters of condolence. If I'd written anything, it would have been one of congratulation. Their father, old Abraham Booth, was a disgusting old sot. He was drunk at his wife's funeral and kept reeling around and hiccuping. I didn't drink much, but I feel awfully queer. I gave him a good jab in the back with my umbrella when he came near me, and it sobered him up until they got the casket out of the house. Young Johnny Booth was to have been married yesterday, but he couldn't because he's gone and got the mumps. Wasn't that like a man? How could he help getting the mumps, poor fellow? I'd poor fellow him, believe me, if I was Kate Stearns. I don't know how he could help getting the mumps, but I do know the wedding supper was all prepared and everything will be spoiled before he's well again. Such a waste. He should have had the mumps when he was a boy. Come, Cornelia. Don't you think you're a mite unreasonable? Miss Cornelia disdained to reply and turned instead to Susan Baker, a grim-faced, kind-hearted, elderly spinster of the Glen, who had been installed as maid-of-all-work at the little house for some weeks. Susan had been up to the Glen to make a sick call and had just returned. How is poor old Aunt Mandy tonight? Asked Miss Cornelia. Susan sighed. Very poorly, Cornelia. I'm afraid she will be soon in heaven, poor thing. Oh, surely it's not so bad as that, exclaimed Miss Cornelia sympathetically. Captain Jim and Gilbert looked at each other. Then they suddenly rose and went out. There are times, said Captain Jim between spasm, when it would be a sin not to laugh. Them two excellent women. Chapter 19, Dawn and Dusk. In early June, when the sandhills were a great glory of pink wild roses and the glen was smothered in apple blossoms, Marilla arrived at the little house accompanied by a black horsehair trunk patterned with brass nails, which had reposed undisturbed in the Green Gables garret for half a century. Susan Baker, who during her week's sojourn in the little house had come to worship young Mrs. Doctor, as she called Anne, with a blind fervor, looked rather jealously askance at Marilla at first. But as Marilla did not try to interfere in kitchen matters and showed no desire to interrupt Susan's ministrations to young Mrs. Doctor, the good handmaiden became reconciled to her presence and told her cronies at the Glen that Miss Cuthbert was a fine old lady and knew her place. One evening, when the sky's limpid bowl was filled with a red glory and the robins were thrilling the golden twilight with jubilant hymns to the stars of evening, there was a sudden commotion in the little house of dreams. Telephone messages were sent up to the Glen. Dr. Dave and a white-capped nurse came hastily down. Marilla paced the garden walks between the quahog shells, murmuring prayers between her set lips, and Susan sat in the kitchen with cotton wool in her ears and her apron over her head. Leslie, looking out from the house up the brook, saw that every window of the little house was alight and did not sleep that night. The June night was short, but it seemed an eternity to those who waited and watched. Oh, will it never end? Said Marilla. Then she saw how grave the nurse and Dr. Dave looked, and she dared ask no more questions. Suppose Anne. But Marilla could not suppose it. Do not tell me, said Susan fiercely, answering the anguish in Marilla's eyes, that God could be so cruel as to take that darling lamb for us when we all love her so much. He has taken others as well beloved, said Marilla hoarsely. But at dawn, when the rising sun rent apart the mists hanging over the sandbar and made rainbows of them, joy came to the little house. Anne was safe, and a wee white lady with her mother's big eyes was lying beside her. Gilbert, his face gray and haggard from his night's agony, came down to tell Marilla and Susan. Oh, thank God, shuddered Marilla. Susan got up and took the cotton wool out of her ears. Now for breakfast, she said briskly. I am of the opinion that we will all be glad of a bite and sup. You tell young Mrs. Doctor not to worry about a single thing. Susan is at the helm. You tell her just to think of her baby. Gilbert smiled sadly as he went away. Anne, her pale face blanched with its baptism of pain, her eyes aglow with the holy passion of motherhood, did not need to be told to think of her baby. She thought of nothing else. For a few hours she tasted of happiness so rare and exquisite that she wondered if the angels in heaven did not envy her. Little Joyce, she murmured when Marilla came in to see the baby. We planned to call her that if she were a girlie. There were so many we would have liked to name her for. We couldn't choose between them, so we decided on Joyce. We can call her Joy for short. Joy. It suits so well. Oh, Marilla, I thought I was happy before. Now I know that I just dreamed a pleasant dream of happiness. This is the reality. You mustn't talk, Anne. Wait till you're stronger, said Marilla warningly. You know how hard it is for me not to talk, smiled Anne. At first she was too weak and too happy to notice that Gilbert and the nurse looked grave and Marilla sorrowful. Then, as subtly and coldly and remorselessly as the sea fog stealing landward, fear crept into her heart. Why was not Gilbert gladder? Why would he not talk about the baby? Why would they not let her have it with her that first heavenly happy hour? Was there anything wrong? Gilbert, whispered Anne imploringly, the baby is all right, isn't she? Tell me, tell me. Gilbert was a long while in turning round. Then he bent over Anne and looked into her eyes. Marilla listened fearfully outside the door, heard a pitiful, heartbroken moan, and fled to the kitchen where Susan was weeping. Oh, the poor lamb, the poor lamb. How can she bear it, Miss Cuthbert? I'm afraid it will kill her. She's been that built up and happy, longing for that baby and planning for it. Cannot anything be done, nohow, Miss Cuthbert? I'm afraid not, Susan. Gilbert says there is no hope. He knew from the first the little thing couldn't live. And it is such a sweet baby, sobbed Susan. I never saw one so white. They're mostly red or yellow, and it opened its big eyes as if it was months old. The little thing, the little thing. Oh, the poor young Mrs. Doctor. At sunset, the little soul that had come with the dawning went away, leaving heartbreak behind it. Miss Cornelia took the wee white lady from the kindly but stranger hands of the nurse and dressed the tiny waxen form in the beautiful dress Leslie had made for it. Leslie had asked her to do that. Then she took it back and laid it beside the poor broken tear-blinded little mother. The Lord has given and the Lord has taken away, dearie, she said through her own tears. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Then she went away, leaving Anne and Gilbert alone together with their dead. The next day, the small white Joy was laid in a velvet casket, which Leslie had lined with apple blossoms, and taken to the graveyard of the church across the harbor. Miss Cornelia and Marilla put all the little love-made garments away, together with the ruffled basket which had been frilled and belaced for dimpled limbs and downy head. Little Joy was never to sleep there. She had found a colder, narrower bed. This has been an awful disappointment to me, sighed Miss Cornelia. I've looked forward to this baby, and I did want it to be a girl, too. I can only be thankful that Anne's life was spared, said Marilla with a shiver, recalling those hours of darkness when the girl she loved was passing through the valley of the shadow. Poor, poor lamb. Her heart is broken, said Susan. I envy Anne, said Leslie suddenly and fiercely, and I'd envy her even if she had died. She was a mother for one beautiful day. I'd gladly give my life for that. I wouldn't talk like that, Leslie dearie, said Miss Cornelia depreciatingly. She was afraid that the dignified Miss Cuthbert would think Leslie quite terrible. Anne's convalescence was long and made bitter for her by many things. The bloom and sunshine of the Four Winds world grated harshly on her, and yet when the rain fell heavily, she pictured it beating so mercilessly down on that little grave across the harbor, and when the wind blew around the eaves, she heard sad voices in it she had never heard before. Kindly callers hurt her, too, with the well-meant platitudes with which they strove to cover the nakedness of bereavement. The letter from Phil Blake was an added sting. Phil had heard of the baby's birth, but not of its death, and she wrote Anne a congratulatory letter of sweet mirth, which hurt her horribly. I would have laughed over it so happily if I had my baby, she sobbed to Marilla, but when I haven't, it just seems like wanton cruelty, though I know Phil wouldn't hurt me for the world. Oh, Marilla, I don't see how I can ever be happy again. Everything will hurt me all the rest of my life. Time will help you, said Marilla, who was racked with sympathy but could never learn to express it in other than age-worn formulas. It doesn't seem fair, said Anne rebelliously. Babies are born and live where they are not wanted, where they will be neglected, where they will have no chance. I would have loved my baby so, and cared for it so tenderly, and tried to give her every chance for good, and yet I wasn't allowed to keep her. It was God's will, Anne, said Marilla, helpless before the riddle of the universe, the why of undeserved pain, and little Joy is better off. I can't believe that, cried Anne bitterly. Then, seeing that Marilla looked shocked, she added passionately, why should she be born at all? Why should anyone be born at all if she's better off dead? I don't believe it's better for a child to die at birth than to live its life out and love and be loved and enjoy and suffer and do its work and develop a character that would give it a personality in eternity. And how do you know it was God's will? Perhaps it was just a thwarting of his purpose by the power of evil. We can't be expected to be resigned to that. Oh, Anne, don't talk so, said Marilla, genuinely alarmed lest Anne was drifting into sleep in dangerous waters. We can't understand, but we must have faith. We must believe that all is for the best. I know you find it hard to think so just now, but try to be brave for Gilbert's sake. He's so worried about you. You aren't getting strong as fast as you should." "Oh, I know I've been very selfish," sighed Anne. "I love Gilbert more than ever, and I want to live for his sake, but it seems as if part of me was buried over there in that little harbor graveyard, and it hurts so much that I'm afraid of life." "It won't hurt so much always, Anne. The thought that it may stop hurting sometimes hurts me worse than all else, Marilla." "Yes, I know. I felt that too about other things. But we all love you, Anne. Captain Jim has been up every day to ask for you, and Miss Moore haunts the place, and Miss Bryant spends most of her time, I think, cooking up nice things for you. Susan doesn't like it very well. She thinks she can cook as well as Miss Bryant. Dear Susan, oh, everybody has been so dear and good and lovely to me, Marilla. I'm not ungrateful, and perhaps when this horrible ache grows a little less, I'll find that I can go on living."